Hey folks, just finished up a day of wheeling. Still have a bit of sunlight left. A few people have asked for this, so let's do a walk around of the pickup. So this is my 1981 Toyota Hilux, also known as the pickup. I've had it since 2020. It was my grandpa's truck. And I'm quite a tinkerer. I can't leave things alone, so I've done quite a few changes to it over the years. I think we'll start in the front. We'll kind of work our way back. Hopefully I don't miss anything. So you'll notice here on the front, there's no front bumper at the moment. That is on account of that worn VR Evo winch. The bumper mounts on these early trucks are really narrow, so I actually had to cut them off to fit this winch. This is a trail gear winch plate that I narrowed to fit onto the front frame. It's meant for one of the later IFS trucks. Pretty simple winch, pretty cheap, works good. We've got 37-inch tall tires. These are Ironman All Country MTs, 37 12.5 R17. The wheels, I believe, are Jegs D-window knockoffs, or they might be the Summit ones. Anyways, they're just about the cheapest steel wheel you can buy. Have the stock style ice and hubs still on there. These tires, every winter, I sipe them by hand, and that greatly improves your snowy traction. And then by the time the next winter rolls around, the rubber's usually worn through enough that I do it again. Now, one thing that's a little weird about this truck, well, there's a lot of things that are weird about this truck, is that I'm running almost no lift with 37-inch tall tires. So, how do I do that? Well, the first big thing is that the firewall has actually been moved back. I've cut the wheel wells out and moved the whole section back about 4 inches. So, factory would be up about here. That lets me run with less lift. And then the second thing is that the fender is actually modified from a stock fender. I took the wheel well from the fender, sectioned it, made it larger, pushed it back and forward a little bit. And that's how I actually fit that with almost no lift. The other part of the front suspension, this is probably what people are most interested in knowing. It looks pretty janky, it's pretty funky. What I've got going on here is that I've actually converted the pickup to a spring under suspension. So when most people lift these or put big tires on them, you put the rear springs from this truck onto the front, and that's good for about 4 inches of lift, and it pushes the axle 2 inches forward. However, I'm not really a fan of how much that lifts the truck, because the 4 to 6 inches of lift makes the truck really high, really tippy. I don't really like the look, and I don't like how it handles on the highway. So what I've done here is these are actually the rear main leaves from a 95 pickup that I re-arched and added more leaves to the pack. So it looks like I've got 6 leaves in that pack there, and that is under the axle. So what that enables you to do is you can run a flat steering arm, and you can run the tie rod under the steering arm. Normally, if you had spring over, that's right where the leaf spring would want to be. So these are flat keyed arms from Front Range Off-Road. You can order them without the holes drilled in them, which is what I did. And I just have the reamer, and then I put the hole in from the bottom with the taper instead of from the top. And this, I think, is just a trail gear tie rod with the FJ80 style ends on it. And then we've got, still retaining the factory style steering dampener. And then coming over to this side, the drag link mounts from the top and comes over to a flat steering arm. I can't remember the company that makes that steering arm. If I can find it, I'll throw it in the description there. Now, this works pretty well for keeping the truck low slung. It does have an additional problem, which is because the angle of the leaf spring is so steep in the front, what ends up happening is you get a lot of brake dive, because when you brake, it wants to push the tire up and back, which causes the nose to dip a lot. As well, because the leaf spring has so much arch in it, it needs a really long shackle. That's a 7-inch shackle. which is really too long to be running in the front of a truck, because you get a bit of death wobble with it because the axle's so under constrained. So I actually have a panhard bar that's added to the suspension. So leaf springs with a panhard bar, and that fixes pretty much all of the death wobble issues. Much better handling on the highway. And then to solve the brake dive, I'm actually running load assist air shocks. These are like what you'd put on the back of a 1-ton truck, and these are actually providing most of the spring rate. So I pump them up to about 100 psi. They're actually teed together, so that means when the truck articulates, it can push the air into the bag on the other side, so it doesn't hurt your articulation. But for that straight line braking performance, it provides most of the spring rate. And then of course, for those, I've got them mounted to shock hoops. And as we come over here, this I added pretty recently. We have rock sliders, square tube. And what I've done with these is I never really liked how rock sliders tend to hang down kind of low on these trucks, especially since the frame tucks up so high. So I've cut out the rocker panel. We've got a tube door sill, and then the rocker panel's just gone from the back of the cab, and there's about 3 or 4 inches trimmed off the bottom of the bed. And so the rocker panel actually mounts up higher than the frame where the factory rocker would be. And there's 5 outriggers on there. Some of them are bent up and some of them are straight, so it gives you that good triangulation for the rock slider. And then back here, I actually did these first, but this is the same style. These 2-piece beds, they just rust like crazy, and one winter I slid into a tree and just knocked that corner of the bed off. So I figured, you know, instead of replacing it, I'm just going to comp cut the whole bed. So I put these sliders on the back here, and again, those have about 3 outriggers that connect them to the frame, and then they also form the basis for the rear bumper. The rear bumper is just a piece of tube, 2x3 tube I think, that I've just cut up into a nice shape. And we have a hitch on there. Then I've got a spare tire mounted. A 37-inch spare tire is quite big and heavy. That's about 120 pounds plus the swing out. So it's using a kit, again, I don't know who from, that is essentially a trailer axle spindle. There's 2 bearings in there. And then I built this with a tensioning rod on it so that I can trim it in if it sags. And the tension rod is actually pushing right now to push it down. And you can see where that just indexes in there. There's a little bushing in there, and it just stays in place. These are detent spring T-handles. You can find those on eBay or wherever have you, about 20 bucks a piece. There's another one over here. Close that up. Holds it in there. Then I've got, of course, the Pizza Planet topper on here. Very old school plastic topper. I've actually fiberglassed over it because it cracked in a hailstorm. And then the tailgate, total junk. I have a bed slide system in here with all my tools and equipment. Going over all that's probably a whole video in and of itself, what I carry in the truck as far as recovery equipment, tools, parts. If anyone is interested in hearing that. We also have an axe up there. I love the Tough Grips. What are those things called? I don't know. I'll cut this part out. And come around the other side here, largely the same. I added these rails to the top side of the bed because the topper sticks out past the bed. These protect it just from trees or whatever have you that you might slide into. In the back here, the rear suspension is a 4-inch Pro Comp lift spring that I've modified the pack on. The overloads that they come with are very, very stiff. So I think I took it out and I put the factory overload spring back in. And then that's a 7-inch shackle with a trail gear creeper joint. And I moved the mount forward a little bit because these lift springs, like a lot of lift springs, are the same eye to eye length along the spring, which makes them shorter because they have more arch in them. So To get the ideal performance, you want to have your shackle angle laid back a bit. Depends based on the arch in the spring. There's a lot of factors. I could talk about that for a while, but this is what I ended up with. Now, the rear axle is out of a 3rd Gen 4Runner. That's the same center section as the truck came with, but the 3rd Gen axle has larger drum brakes and 5 inches wider track, so I'm not running any wheel spacers in the rear. I've also done a shackle flip, so you notice that the U-bolts are on the bottom. Just gets you a little more ground clearance. Oh yeah, I threw this toolbox in here for no particular reason other than I thought it's funny how this space is wasted on these trucks. And so when that panel got rusty and got a dent in it, put a toolbox in it. As far as gears and lockers, I am running a 529 Grizzly locker in the rear, and in the front I have a TRD E-locker that's been converted to cable actuation. So again, 529, and I'm using what would be called a marine control cable, which just actuates where the old electronic actuator used to be. It just so happened that the one that I bought, I got real cheap. The actuator was broken. They're so expensive, I just thought it'd be more reliable to make it cable driven. No complaints with it. It runs great. I have a square tube drive shaft in the front, just on account of how much this axle swings forward when it droops out. Let's see if we can crawl under here. Oh, I should have picked somewhere that didn't have snow. So in the rear, I'm running a CV driveline. So that is just the factory rear drive shaft with the CV joint from a front drive shaft. And the purpose for that is so that I can swing the rear pinion up, which puts it about 4 inches higher than if you were using a conventional drive shaft, which is great for rock crawling. I have a Skies Off-Road transfer case parking brake on here that is obviously not hooked up. I have not had good success with this. I find it needs adjustment all the time. It can't actually clamp hard enough to keep you on any kind of an incline. I'm just done with it. I'm going to be taking it off. With the 3rd Gen axle in the rear, I'm going to be reinstalling that parking brake, getting all the parking brake cables out of a 3rd Gen at a junkyard in the spring and throwing all that in. For cross member, we have a Bud built single transfer case cross member. If you're using this with dual cases like I am, a good trick is to get these square U-bolts and just throw them over the frame, and then you can slide the cross member wherever you need it, bolt it in, and you just use those thick eye washers. Works great. I don't have the skid plate on it right now because, frankly, the hardware for that is a pain in the ass to get off. They always seize on because you get mud and stuff that sits on top and it just corrodes them, so I just leave it off. I really don't do a lot of stuff where the ground clearance of the midsection's a concern, so I hardly ever scrape that anyhow. As far as driveline, we've got dual transfer cases like you'd expect with the 4.7 in the rear. They're both 21 splines. You can see there's a lot of oil leaks there. I need to pull this transmission out. I have the original L45 4-speed in there right now. I had an L52. I broke second gear towing a Sprinter van. I have a W56 on my bench right now that will be going in soon. Just needs to be rebuilt, which I'm in the process of doing. Stock clutch, all of that is just stock. I don't see a point in upgrading the pressure plate and that kind of thing. These trucks don't really make that much power. I don't see the purpose of it. Now, the real secret sauce that makes the suspension work is this traction bar. So the traction bar is welded solid onto the axle end with a fair bit of reinforcement. Those are actually the two ends of the, I forget what the bar is called, the bar that comes on the front axle that everyone takes off when they lift their truck. And then up to this point, that's actually just an FJ40 shackle. And it's welded onto the horseshoe cross member. So this drastically improves your grip in the rear because it stops the leaf springs from being able to wrap, meaning that you're always putting the traction down. They're not winding up and jumping. Works fantastic. I don't really see a reason to link the rear of the truck because this works so well for what I use it for. I really have no complaints. Works good. Exhaust, terrible, awful, patchwork, real bad, need to fix it. It's sitting on the cross member right now. I noticed when I started it up today that this flex joint is shot. It's leaking from the rear, so I'm probably gonna have to do something about that pretty soon. But come on, what on this truck is not disgustingly half broken? Marlin crawler transmission mount, pretty key for keeping the torque down when you've got dual transfer cases. Coming inside here, just finished a day of wheeling. It's pretty filthy in here. Got a Midland radio, have an aftermarket roll sensor, have a tack added to the dash, have some gauges down here. If you're running a carbureted engine, get a wideband O2 sensor. That is the only way that you can know what's going on. That is how you tune your carburetor. I love that thing. The USB charger right there. I've got some switches on the panel here, inboard control for the winch, and then lights that I used to have on a bumper that's not on there anymore. Retro sound, Hermosa stereo. I can't really recommend it. It's pretty expensive, and I've had some problems with the volume knobs. Originally I got it because I wanted to keep a more factory look, but you know, that's kind of gone out the window. You'll notice here that I've got this 5-shifter setup. So obviously we've got the transmission shifter, we've got the crawl box, the rear transfer case, 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive. These are the trail gear twin sticks. And then here, that is the lever that actuates the front locker. Then back here, oh, this is so messy. I wanted to get one of these Molly panels to see what the fuss is all about. Frankly, I don't really understand it, but it does hold some stuff there, pretty good. And back there, we've just got a sub behind the seat. These seats are actually out of an 87 Camaro that I was parting out, and the seats are great, but no one wanted to buy them, so I threw them in the truck. Let's get under the hood. So, unfortunately, a while back, I cracked the oil pan on this truck, didn't realize it, ran the engine out of oil, spun a couple bearings. I decided I wanted to rebuild the 22R because, for one, I live in an emissions-controlled area in Colorado, and two, just for the purposes of keeping the original motor in here, I thought it'd be kind of cool. So the motor is a LC Performance Stroker 22R rotating assembly. So that's forged cranked pistons and rods. That makes it about a 2.55 liter. Then it's got a upgraded camshaft in it. The head was sent out for oversized valves. I ported the head. I ported the intake manifold. We have a hooker header on there. It's got a windage tray. Probably a few more things I'm forgetting. Basically just an all-out kind of truck motor build. I'm pretty happy with it. It definitely makes a fair bit more power than stock. I took it to a dyno, and uncorrected at altitude, it made 63 horsepower, and I don't know, about double that in torque. I have a whole write-up on this engine build on the Marlin Crawler forum. I'll link that to be more in-depth. I have about 10,000 miles on this motor now. It's running great. No complaints, nothing wrong with it. Over here, this is a kind of an unfinished project. This is a York 210 air compressor, which I am going to use to run a tank on the truck, run onboard air. Then down here, there's a second alternator, which I did have hooked up as an onboard stick welder. Since I rebuilt the engine, I haven't hooked that back up yet. We'll need to do that. Otherwise, under the hood, more or less just the same mediocrity that you see everywhere else around the truck. Look at all that rust. There's nothing particularly high dollar going on here. I did put in H4 conversion bulbs. These have an LED turn signal in them. which I think is awesome because obviously I don't have a bumper, I don't have turn signals. Super trick piece. I've put these on a few vehicles. Love them. Good stuff. A few things I forgot to mention. I run YJ mirrors on these doors. I converted them a couple years ago. Best thing I've done, because when you run in tough trails in the snow, slipping and sliding, you often break a mirror off if you're really getting after it. These are $20 for a pair of them on eBay. I've gone through 3 or 4 pairs in a couple years. Totally worth it. I did forget to mention, under here there is also, where are you? Oh, hang on, other side. There is an air tank under there. So that is hooked to the York 210 compressor. Not fully functional yet, but we're getting there. So anyways, I think that's about it. When I go to edit this, I'm sure I'll find something I forgot to mention, but overall the theme is, you know, it's just overwhelming mediocrity. There's nothing high dollar or particularly fancy on this truck. A lot of it's homemade. All the sheet metal work, all the welding, all the wrenching I do on this truck. Nothing terribly expensive. This is a lot of stuff that you can replicate on your own if you are so inclined. But really, that's all it takes. This truck gets after it, keeps up with the best of them for its tire size, and you know, it's a lot of fun to wheel and to drive around. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching.